So what we're going to do today is we're going to reassemble this stripped IMB26 carburetor, which has been taken off the blue car, stripped and completely cleaned. We have a bare body here, other than the fact it's got the throttle spindle in there. The rest of that is completely stripped down. So you can see all of the orifices in there, the float bowl, the venturi. I have left the secondary venturi in there again because I don't want to knock it out, because there's nothing wrong with it, so I can leave that in there. We've got the bit where the choke mechanism or the enrichment device sits. We've got the stripped down top where the float will go. This is a slightly later Spanish version of the Weber. As you can see, it has the fuel line goes directly in here down to the needle valve. There is no threaded cap on the top there, and there's also no filter in there. Other parts, we have the idle air mix screw in there, which fits in here and screws in and out, allowing air to bleed past underneath where the throttle plates are for controlling the mixture. We've got the gasket that sits on the top there. We have the float, which has been tested. We've got the needle valve holder, and the little spacer gasket that goes in there. We have the fuel enrichment choke. We have the fuel enrichment valve, its spring and its retaining clip. We have the idle jet and the idle jet holder. We have over here the starter jet or the slow running jet. We have the emulsion tube. We have the idle air corrector, the air corrector jet. We have the main jet and the main jet holder. And those are basically all the components that make this carburetor work. So what I'm going to try and do is to chuck this onto a tripod, see whether or not I can kind of film the reassembly of this and just kind of talk you through how it all goes together. Now, those of you of a certain age, sort of a similar age to me, will potentially remember James May when he used to do his series on the reassembler, where he basically put something back together, an old phone, an electric guitar, that sort of thing, and kind of talk you through how it all worked as he was doing it, and then at the end it would all be fully functioning. Now, I can't guarantee that this is going to be fully functioning by the end of it, but it should be, because it was basically working before I started putting it together. So here we have the basic body of the carburetor there. Just trying to find where my camera is actually pointing. The throttle spindle has been left in there with the butterfly on it. I am going to swap these screw heads out, because actually, I don't know whether you can see it particularly well from there. They don't have, or this doesn't have the countersunk heads in it like it should have, and that's just a huge blockage of that minimal airflow that goes through there. So anything I can get rid of there will be good to smooth out the airflow. So may as well start from the bottom. This has been refaced and flattened down on the bottom there. So I'll start by installing the thing that's likely to roll away the first, which is the idle mixture screw, and it simply sits in here, and I will screw it down to gently seat. Don't want to go too far because I don't want to mangle the end of it. But you can see this little hole there. You can see this little hole here is where the needle sits up against, and as I release that, it's going to let more air bleed past. So I will actually set that to the correct setting for initial mixture now, which is 1.5 turns out from the stop. So there you go, that is the first part here. The second hole you can see here is for the next bit that I'm going to put in. This is where the choke mechanism allows richer mixture fuel to come straight through here. It doesn't have an air choke, it has an enrichment device, and the enrichment device is controlled by this, which we will have a look at now. As the car is choked, that is pulled forwards. What happens is that lifts that little cam up there. Now what this interacts with is the enrichment device, the valve that I'm about to install into here. So it sits through here. So we will get, first of all, the valve itself before that spring rolls away, which is simply a valve that seats on a taper, and that drops just into there. Then we have a spring, a return spring, that controls its motion, and then we have this annoying little clip that holds the thing together. So I will try and pin that in on camera, although I may well have to come back and do this off camera because I may be here for a while and it may ping off. So what I'll do is I'm just gonna pause this whilst I fit this spring clip. Yeah, I just needed something slightly more solid to press this against. So we've now got the spring clip, and underneath there is the spring, and there is the choke valve. And as I say, the taper there sits against the bottom, and as it's moved up, it will then release fuel through there, enabling the mixture to be enriched. The little catch there on the cam sits against a little groove on the valve there. So I will pop the choke mechanism back on. Let me just get these screws out so I can line it up. Oh, there you go. It's aligned now. I'll stick these in here and then we'll connect that. So we now have idle mixture, or mixture adjustment screw, and we have choke via the mechanism of this enrichment device. As I say, on like that. Although you can't see it, you can hear it moving the valve. Again, it's very difficult to see with the light the way it is, but that there is now installed and functional. So then what we can do is we can start looking at the jets, and we'll work up from the bottom. We'll work up with the main jet. So the main jet is very much like a sort of Holly style main jet, and goes into this holder here. So I'll just put that in finger tight for a moment, and then I'll just crack it down with a screwdriver. Now this here is quite, I wouldn't say unique, but it's quite an interesting way of being installed on here, because unlike a lot of carburetors where you get to the main jet from within the float bowl there, on this it's screwed in, bolted in from the side, which means you can change and clean the main jet without disassembling the entire carb. You can drain most of the float bowl through here. It's got a little brass washer in there, Again, I won't torque that down for the moment, but the orifice that the fuel is sucked through is there. So that is the main jet. Next, idle jet. And again, the idle jet is again a similar sort of design. Again, it has been fully cleaned out. I'll just check that against the light before I install it. Yep, and it sits in a little holder. In this case, it just slides in like that, and the holder has an O-ring. And this again mounts from outside, which means when inevitably you end up with crap in it, you can remove it from the outside there. So that's the bottom part of the carburetor all put together. What we haven't got at the moment is any of the metering devices in there, the air corrector jets and the idle speed jets and stuff like that. So what I will install now is the slow speed jet here, and that just drops into position there, and we'll just tighten it down like so. Next, hiding under here, hopefully not rolling away, is the emulsion tube. Emulsion tube sits in there, and the job of the emulsion tube is really part of, well, it's the main part of the transition circuit as you go from slow speed running to running off the main jet. And you can see the holes that are in there are designed to mix air in with the fuel, i.e. creating an emulsion. So we'll pop that into there and just kind of push it down into place. And what we have that sits above it, oh, let me just go and find that on the floor. Stylishly found on the floor, the air corrector jet. And the air corrector jet just sits on top of the emulsion tube. And again, we'll screw that in there like so. And that is the entire bottom half of the carburetor setup. Now what we need to do is to work on the top half. So the way that this particular carb works is that the float hangs from a spindle here. So the float's height is set based off its position relative to the top plate of the carburetor. I'm just going to take these screws out because I'm going to have to pop this upside down. I don't want to lose screws. As you've seen, I've already managed to lose one thing and refound it. So I'm just going to take these, I'm going to pop them over there for a moment. Now what controls the fuel coming in here is a needle valve. So a needle valve is simply a two-part valve. This is the body of it here, which has a tapered fitting in here. And again, I'll connect this properly in a moment. I'll just spin it down sort of finger tight for the moment as I'm talking. It's a 10mm spanner will go on there. So I'll tighten that off camera in a second. As that goes down, we'll just get that finger tight for the moment. And then you have the needle itself. So this is, at one end is a ball that sits against the float, and at the other end is, so it's going to focus, there we go, is a little taper, a little needle that sits in here. The idea being that as the float bowl fills up, the float pushes on here and closes the fuel, or closes the needle valve, and prevents the fuel from overflowing and causing the float bowl to get too full. Now I'm just going to make sure I get this gasket up the correct way. So that sits on the base like that, which means it's going to have to be the opposite way up when it's on here. And I'm doing that because I need to have that in place before I put the float on, otherwise I can't get the gasket on. So the float is adjustable via these two tangs here, or tabs, or whatever you want to call them, and they're adjustable for the float height. One is adjusting for the closed height and one for the drop on the float, like how empty it allows the fuel bowl to get before it opens the needle valve. I won't faff with them because I have them set up correctly, and I'll just sit this over here and put the spindle through. Slightly unusual design, these later ones, because the early ones had a split in one of these spindle towers, and that was where it all kind of was a tight fit. This, however, seems to fit from either direction. You used to drive it from the non-split end to the split end. So if you've got an earlier one, a proper Italian built one rather than the Spanish one, then that's how it will work. And so there is the float. That would be an empty float bowl, or a low float bowl. You can see the needle valve is open and fuel will be flowing. As it fills up, it closes that needle valve, and the adjustments between the closed height and the open height are what control the fuel level in the bowl. As I say, I have adjusted this. I will adjust it again off camera, but to fit this is as simple as making sure everything is lined up, the holes and the gaskets and whatnot, and just sliding that into position on there, dropping the 4 bolts back down, and there we have a finished carburetor. The only thing that I will be doing off camera is swapping these large head bolts out for countersunk ones, which will enable that to actually have a little bit better airflow. So there we go. The reassembler has struck again, and we now have a fully functioning IMB26 carburetor, and hopefully you've now got a slightly better understanding about how the carburetor in your Fiat actually works. Could go in for hours about all the different circuits and orifices and whatnot in there, but fundamentally those are the important parts. You need to spec them right. All the 500s from all years had exactly the same jet sizes. There might have been a slight different jet size for the 650 ones, but basically the main jets and the idle jets are an identical size. You can change them. They are freely available, they're readily available, and so therefore you can tune the carburetor as you need. So next time I'll stick that onto the car, and we'll see whether it fixes its running issues, or whether the running issues had nothing to do with that emulsion tube that I've cleaned up, and were in fact actually to do with the air gap or potential air leak between this and the base plate that I showed you last week. If you enjoyed that, please give us a like, please give us a subscribe. Till the next time, take care guys.